Welcome back to Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Tom Collins, Executive Director of the Arizona Clean Elections Commission.
And I'm Gina Roberts, Voter Education Director.
So 2026 is already a busy year with more to come. We're going to be here weekly talking about civics with people closest to the issue and trying to connect the dots.
Yeah, so when we come up on our ballot in 2026, it'll be the first time in over a decade where we actually don't have a U.S. Senate seat on the ballot.
That's right. That is going to make a big difference for the way that this election's approached. I mean, for example, in kind of just a practical way, it means that the television ads you're going to see are going to be different than what you're used to because, you know, those Senate races that we had back to back to back were very, very expensive and people saw them constantly as soon as you turn on television.
So, you know, we're talking about offices here that are at the state level, the federal level, but also we're in January, so that means our state legislature is in full swing. We've seen over 1,000 bills that have already been filed. Yeah. We're obviously keeping an eye on the elections ones.
Right.
And of course, you know, Governor Hobbs, she had her State of the State. She had her budget that she released.
Yeah.
So budget negotiations are, of course, underway. Lots of things happening.
So that's going to be ongoing. And then when it comes to the election bills, Gina, I mean, that's something you've always got your eye on. What do we know so far?
You know, the top thing that I'm keeping an eye on right now is the date of the primary election going to change. So where we are today, right now, it's scheduled for August 4th. And we have a bill that's going in the legislature to permanently change it. So it's going to be the last Tuesday in July. And this is necessary for a number of reasons as it relates to the election calendar and just ensuring election officials have the appropriate time that they need to complete certain tasks and put us in alignment with the electoral college count. So that's really what I'm keeping an eye on right now because it's going to change. If we change the date of the primary election, everything falls. It's like a domino effect, but I guess backwards. So we just, you know, we operate E-minus. So election day minus, whether it's 27 days, 29 days. But I think most importantly, what we have upcoming is candidate filing is going to be happening soon. So we need to know what that primary election date is going to be.
Right. No, that's a pretty important thing. And I you know, you'll see probably because this kind of bill needs an emergency clause. So basically what that means is most of the time when a bill passes in Arizona, you need, you know, 90. You get 90 days for the voters to try to refer it, no matter what it is. But as an emergency clause, it goes into effect immediately. And because of what Gina said about the timing, that has to happen. What that means, though, is that you need to have a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So, you know, the opportunities to try to find a way to get something you really want to get in the bill are a little. The stakes are a little high for that.
Well, hopefully we know what that date will be confirmed soon. But of course, another thing that's up for discussion too, which we've been keeping an eye on here, is Prop 123. Yeah. So that's another significant piece of legislation. And we've actually, on previous episodes of Beyond the Ballot AZ, we've talked about this, especially with our conversation with Glenn Farley, but we've been having ongoing podcast discussions about education and how it's funded.
There was a funding crisis, a revenue crisis in Arizona during the Great Recession. Legislature suspended some elements of the K-12 formula to balance the books. The litigation was over the legality of those suspensions. It was ultimately settled with the school districts. One of the tools that the state used to pay for that settlement was Proposition 123, which temporarily for 10 years increased distributions from the land trust. As you alluded to, Gina, that had a 10-year sunset date. It is now sunsetting.
Without it in place, the general fund which is basically the state's checkbook, is obligated to backfill that. So basically the idea here is whether or not you're going to keep that revenue coming out of the state land trust, which at least there has been a consensus around. But again, because education policy is such a issue in flux and there's both a partisan divide and then there's other different types of divides around how that ought to work at the legislative level, you know, I mean, there'll be issues whether or not Prop 123 gets connected to, you know, school choice and the, you know, empowerment scholarship program, those kinds of things are going to be up for debate.
Yeah, so all of that is going to be ultimately up for voters to decide on the ballot this year, well, potentially this year.
Well, you know, and it's funny, you mentioned that's going to go to voters. We will probably see the legislature putting other stuff on the ballot. We're not sure yet what. And then, I was at my local library the other day,
And that's amazing right there. Like, just quick pause. Shout out to local libraries. I am a huge fan of our local libraries. They provide amazing services. Okay.
That's the original co-working space. And so I was there, and there was a fellow there doing candidate petitions, and he said, now this is the only sole source here, but he said he thinks that in the next week or so he'll hear if anybody's going to make a push to put it on the ballot via initiative. So in Arizona, you can have stuff put on the ballot by the legislature or the voters by gathering signatures. So I think he was, this is what he's planning to do for the spring for work. So
he's a signature gatherer.
He's a signature
he might
gatherer.
have more insight than us.
That's right. But that was, so we'll see if that happens soon. And Gina, I want to ask you. Last week, I think, we were at the Civics Matters Summit at the Cardinal Stadium. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So last week we had this great opportunity to go down to the inaugural Arizona Civic Summit, and it was brought together by the Arizona Cardinals Football Club. And it was this opportunity for students from 6th grade to 12th grade to come down and learn about all of the opportunities on civic engagement.
We're here for activating your civic superpowers. We're going to talk a little bit about the voting process. When you get old enough, you know what you're stepping into. We're going to talk about media literacy, talking about deep fakes and misinformation and AI. And then we're going to have a little discussion about how to speak to each other civilly.
And we had over 4,000 students there, which was fantastic. And we spoke to them about voting, about media literacy and civic engagement. And it was a great time, just a wonderful opportunity to connect with the kids from, again, 6th graders through, even potentially even 18-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
12th graders.
Yeah.
So it was really fun to go down there and just first, bring awareness about what civic education and engagement opportunities exist in the state, why it's important, and help them connect the dots. Because, when we reach out to students and we talk about and inspire them to create this civic life, they turn into adults that vote.
Right.
So very important that we do that outreach. And again, very grateful to the Arizona Cardinals Football Club for including us in that process.
And was Captain Activate there?
Captain Activate was there, and he was very popular. And, again, it inspired the students, the kids. So, again, Captain Activate, our civic education mascot for the state, he comes off of the comic book that we created.
Right.
So why a comic book? Why even go that route? Because we have the opportunity for storytelling here to reach kids, make it interesting for them, promote reading literacy, promote literacy skills for them, and connecting the storyline of why civic engagement is important. So we just talked about the legislature being in session.
Yeah.
And we have students here who are impacted every day by the decisions that our policymakers are making. They can go down to the legislature and testify.
Right.
They can go to their school board meetings and testify and talk about what is important to them. When they turn 18, are they going to be able to afford rent? Or can they afford their tuition? When they're in school now, do they, what concerns do they have about their curriculum that they're being taught? So even though they may not be 18 of a voting age, they still can engage in civic life.
We're coming into our statewide election year where we're going to have all the state offices on the ballot: governor, attorney general, secretary of state. We're going to have our first lieutenant governor elect as part of the ticket with the gubernatorial nominees. And I think that connecting civics and the democratic process to the real world is something that I hope we're able to do with the podcast, because the truth is that, we're not naive or ignorant about the things that are going on in the world that are affecting people, what they're seeing on the news, what they're seeing on their phones. And I think that finding ways to highlight for folks the ways that you can try to channel your what you're seeing into trying to influence the outcomes that affect your daily life is something that we all think is important.
I think you just made the pitch, Tom, of why listeners should tap that follow button and subscribe to Beyond the Ballot AZ, so they're notified every time we have a new episode and they can stay informed on civic engagement, civic education, and voting. That's it for Beyond the Ballot AZ. I'm Gina Roberts.
And I'm Tom Collins. We'll see you next week.